or wrong, shriven first, and then embraced the executioner and went to their deaths gladly. What did Bluebeard, for example, actually do? Wasn't he a murderer of little children or something? He was a serial murderer, I think.
It murders wives. That's
was it wives?
Yeah, that's the
yeah,
story.
He was a serial murderer of some kind.
Yeah.
And yet the story is that his execution was a masterpiece of dramatic justice. That is, he agreed that he ought to be killed. He didn't try to get off. He didn't hire a lawyer, and he didn't try to get the governor to pardon him, and all that kind of stuff. If you've committed a crime, then you go to your death. Hierarchy and good fellowship. If we could put those two words together, two phrases together, and then broadcast them to the world, we would have spread what today is called Catholic social doctrine.
Yeah, the fact is that people in democracies are very snobbish.
Ooh, you bet
They're snobbish.
They have to be.
We all discovered our own snobbery when we were in Ireland in 1976. We had a taxi cab driver that we hired ourselves. He lived right next door to the hotel we were living, and he had a Mercedes Benz that he drove people around in, and we hired him to go to Dublin once in a while, and we got to know him, and we became friendly with him, and before we knew it, he was giving us advice. We'd all be talking about something in the back seat, and he'd say. I remember once specifically, we were talking about taking students out to one of the islands, and we said, "Do you think we ought to take them all at once?" And we were talking about it, and all of a sudden he said from the front seat, he said, "Well," he said, "I wouldn't take all those students out there at once." He said, "I think that would be a terrible mistake." He had no hesitation. He felt that he was a part of the operation, and that he had as much right to give his view of the subject. And I think he was right.
He had experience.
He had experience. Yeah, he had a reason to talk. But I was shocked. I thought, damn it, this guy, what does he know about it? But of course he was right, and it is that. But if it had been the prime minister sitting in the back seat talking about foreign policy, he still would have been listening, and he would have felt perfectly free, and the prime minister would have listened to him too, because Ireland still has some sense of that hierarchy.
Yeah.
It's still present there, whereas in the United States it's gone altogether.
It's at least still in the memory.
Yeah,
they've lost it, but it's in the memory.
Yeah.
And that same taxi driver also, you get that great sense of good fellowship, and you realize too that you're by no means the most important person who sat in that back seat. He'll start to say, "Oh, well, about a year ago, Sir Laurence Olivier was here." You think, "Well, wait a minute," or T.S. Eliot was here, or in our field we tend to think of academic people, but on the other hand, it may be that the Prince had written in that seat too. So he had mixed with very, very great people, and he could judge exactly where we were in the hierarchy.
We weren't up at the top.
No.
We tend to think we are.
We think we are. Yeah. That's wonderful. Hierarchy is the only foundation for fellowship, and this is really, quite seriously, it is the whole of the teaching of the famous, encyclicals on what is called, as I say, social doctrine. That's what it is. Order. We were going back now to the theology of order. That is, freedom can only exist on the basis of order. Otherwise, you've got chaos. And chaos, if you wanted to get a perfect image, or a good image anyway, you want to get a really good image of chaos, think of what they call gridlock. You know that phrase? They use it in big cities, like New York City. They say that the police actually fear something they call gridlock. That is, that at a rush hour, if a bridge goes out, Manhattan is an island, and there's about, all told, there may be 10 bridges. Well, if one bridge goes out, they reroute the traffic. If two bridges go out, they reroute the traffic. But if three go out, they face gridlock. And gridlock is where they can't move. That is where all the streets are jammed and you can't reroute anybody. You can't even get an ambulance through. You know? And they fear, they call this gridlock. You know, well, that's chaos. Chaos. It's total gridlock. No freedom at all. Freedom is when, to keep up that image, all the bridges are open and everything is running properly. That's so important to see. This is the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution. This is 1989, and everybody's talking about 1789 and the storming of the Bastille and liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's just all over the world. It's on television and magazines. And the French Revolution, the doctrine of the French Revolution was wrong. I don't know, maybe the world needed it. I mean, we need a lot of wrong in order to make things right. But liberty and equality and fraternity are wrong. There's no such thing as liberty and equality and fraternity. You can't put those three together. That's wrong. Hierarchy and fellowship and liberty, those really go together. These people are free, marvelously free. So he says lordings. There's a commentary on one word. Were you going to?
No, I don't know whether lordings is a kind
diminutive?
of diminutive.
Yeah, it might be.
I think it is maybe
might be
diminutive.
You're making a little
yeah,
joke here.
Little
lords.
joke.
Little lords.
Yeah.
He doesn't say lords and ladies.
Yeah, right.
It could be. Yeah. Lordings could have. Now hearkeneth for the best. I mean, notice how well this bartender talks too.
Bartenders are eloquent men.
They're eloquent. Again, we literary people think we're so smart, but we don't come up with phrases.
If I can sit around and listen to a good innkeeper, I can just listen to him.
They're natural poets.
Yeah.
And they talk all the time, of course. They're practicing. I mean, just look at that phrase. You can learn a lot. You see, we use these books as the basis of a liberal arts course in a college, and one of the tasks that we're given as teachers of freshman students, these would be sophomore students in a liberal arts course, is we want to teach them how to read and how to write and how to talk on a high level. There's no better way to teach the English language to young people, anybody, than to give them this book. Just get that phrase in your memory. Look at the economy of it, the perfection of it, the precision of it. Lordings quod he nu hearkeneth for the best. We've commented on the poetic meaning of that word hark, of the enormous importance of that word hark, hearkeneth for the best, he says. The word hark means listen. Stop all this endless distraction that you're involved in, and hark to what I'm saying. But takit nocht, I pray you, in disdain. And there are a lot of Latinized and French words here. Disdain. The word dain comes from dein, denius. It means worthy. That is, don't take this as something unworthy. We use the word disdain. That's a marvelous word. We ought to use it more. That is, if you're about to write something, if you have to write a paper or you have to write a letter to a friend, don't ever overlook words like disdain. We almost never use them. Pick up your newspaper. Pick up your magazine. We have over here Time magazine. Look at from one end to the other. You'll never find the word disdain. They don't use it. They have a vocabulary of I don't know where they get it. What dictionary do they use?
Well, they don't use very much of it, but every dictionary.
Yeah. Well, George Orwell calls it newspeak, and I think what was the one that I.A. Richards called it? You remember? He actually advocated a new dictionary where we would be limited. He didn't. Orwell was making fun of.
I know what you mean. Basic English.
Basic English. Basic English.
Yeah.
There was a big movement of basic English, And I think the magazines and the television audiences use it.
Yeah, they never want to use a word about which anyone will have any doubt of the meaning. There will never be any ambiguity in it at all.
So sententious won't be used.
Oh, never.
And even disdain
no.
or debonairete
No.
will not be used.
No.
You can learn a great deal about language, and especially in this case the English language. This is the point, to spake in short and plain, that each of you to shorter with our way, that is to make our way shorter, in this viage. Now he uses that word voyage. It's an image of pilgrimage. Those are the word. We are all voyagers. We are travelers. We are pilgrims. This life is a voyage. Our home is not here. And of course, he's specifically thinking about the trip that they're about to take. It's about 23 miles, I think, from the Tabard Inn on the outskirts of London to the cathedral of Canterbury. But he calls it a voyage, a viage. That each of you to shorter with our way in this viage shall tell us tway, that is, tell two tales. To Canterbury ward he made it so, and homeward he shall tell it others too. Of aventures that whilom han befall. Now he spells out what he wants, and in doing so he defines the meaning of the word tale. These are called the Canterbury Tales. What is a tale? Well, this is what a tale is. It's an adventure, an aventure.
And it's something that you tell.
Oh, yeah, well, that's right.
The word tale derives from the word tell. That's one you could guess quite easily, or you might guess quite easily. Tell and tale come from the same word. And it has to do with something that you tell. It isn't something that's really written down. You tell a story, you tell a tale. A tale is something told. So that's part of the nature of the tale. It comes from it's a story that you don't necessarily make up the story. None of these stories are made up by the teller of the tale, so far as we know. In fact, they've identified sources, I think, for nearly all the literary sources of one kind or another, or they're old stories that have been told over and over again. They're not original stories, but they are told by a particular person, and that person tells the story his way, so that he reveals his own character to some extent.
Now there's another paradox, isn't there? That is, if you want to be original, the only way to be original is to tell an old tale.
Right.
If you try to make one up, you'll be part of the chaos. That is, it'll be very boring. Yeah. If I set out to be a creative writer, and to write something absolutely original, it's going to turn out to be something so commonplace nobody will ever listen to it. But if I tell the tale of Icarus falling out of the sky, I'll be completely original. Because I can bring to bear upon that old tale everything of myself, precisely because I'm not thinking of myself. I'm concentrating on the melody.
Yeah, well,
there's so much in this.
People tell stories that they remember and that they love. That is, you don't just tell any story. You tell the story that you know. I'm sure all these people know dozens of stories. They could tell any story, but this is they're vying for a prize. They want to tell the best stories they know, so they pick out a story that they particularly like, and that tells you a great deal. You know a person by the stories he tells you. They're not stories that he makes up. They're stories that he knows, that have stuck in his memory. And so the knight tells a tale about two young noble men. It's a love story, because that's something the knight knows something about and is interested in.
Again, this is a paradox, just as chaos is total individual freedom, and hierarchy is real freedom. That's true. Now, that same kind of paradox applies to writing or to telling. If you tell an old tale, it's given. You're then free to tell it as you will. But if you sit down to create the thing from the beginning, you're a complete slave. There's no creativity in it at all. Thomas Mann, who is one of the most important writers of the 20th century, perhaps the most important. He's a modernist, terrible modernist. Was a sad modernist, especially in his old age. And in the beginning of one of his late novels, which was a fable, I think it's called The Holy Sinner. He tried to tell a medieval tale. And he has a long preface. And he says, in effect, I am the greatest novelist alive today. I have won the Nobel Prize. I am acknowledged to be the greatest living writer in the whole world. And I have written The Magic Mountain and Buddenbrooks, and everybody knows that I'm the greatest. And in my old age, I must say, I feel that I have never written anything at all. I have never been able to tell a story. And he goes on about the genius of story. And it's very moving. It's very moving. And he says, in this book I'm going to try, and he can't do it. It's good. I mean, it's a bad book. It's really not one of his. But I mean, the point about modern writing is that story's been lost.
Yeah, the story is gone. Above all, the story is gone. And that's what always happens when you try to make something up. You can't make up a story. You remember we started this whole series of tapes with Homer. And Homer says he addresses the muse, and the muse tells him a story. He says, "You tell me a story." He said, "Now these are all things that really happened, and you tell me the story, and I'll write it down." He doesn't make up a story at all.
And he certainly didn't. I mean, even in the simplest sense of the word, that is, who was Homer? We don't even know. But whoever he was, he gathered together tales that had been sung by rhapsodes over a period of at least 500 years. Homer, the date of this particular author, of this particular manuscript, poem that we have, I think the scholars nowadays claim it's around the year 800, and they think the Trojan War probably took place in the year 1500. Those are guesses. Those are wild guesses. 500 years either way. But certainly the poems that we have are the result of a long, long tradition of telling. And it's true. You and I have certainly discovered this in our teaching over years and years and years of going over this old stuff. It gets better every time. Whereas if you had to do that to Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks, he'd blow your brains out. You couldn't teach that book more than twice. Yeah. You might do well the second time because there's a lot in it you missed. But boy, when it got to the third or the fourth, it would be deadly. Remember Frank Nellick, our old colleague, mentioned the last time we were together as a teaching team here, we gave a little lecture here about a year ago, and Frank brought up that wonderful comic thing in one of Evelyn Waugh's novels where the guy has to read Dickens over and over and over and over. It's the most horrible torture that you could imagine. Dickens is a wonderful writer, but it's true, even Charles Dickens would be a deadly chore if you had to read him over and over again for the rest of your life. But that's not true of Homer. That's not true of Chaucer. It never cloys. Never cloys.
Retains kind of freshness about it.
Like nature, like the spring. You never get bored. Of course, you read about the decadent. Thomas Mann writes about people who look out the window and they say, "Oh no, not April," or T.S. Eliot, says exactly that. April is cool as well. But that's a joke. That a person who's tired of April is obviously tired of existence. But Chaucer is like April. These stories are perennial. A tale. Harry Bailey here says, now he tells you, he defines the tale with a lot of precision. The first thing he does say is, in this to tell a talus. So the word to tell, tale. Everybody's going to tell a tale. So that idea of the tale is something you tell. And then he says, where are they? Of aventures that whilom han befall. 1, 2, 3, there they are. They're aventures. What is an aventure? Well, the word adventure. But what is the meaning of the word adventure? Now, a tale has got to be an adventure. If it isn't an adventure, it isn't a tale. And that's why the realistic, super realistic novel is not a tale.
They disdain adventures.
That's right.
To use Harry Bailey's word, they disdain adventures. Actually, if you go back through English literature, clear up into the 19th century, you will discover that in the title is the word adventure. That is, it's the adventures of Robinson Crusoe. It's the adventures of Tom Jones. It's the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and the adventures of Tom Sawyer. That word was absolutely.
But it's quite properly used.
It's properly used. That's right. They are not novels, really, properly speaking. They're not, and that's true of Nicholas Nickleby and all those novels of Dickens. They're all the adventures of. And usually they get cut off. That is the modern editors leave those out of the title, and everybody simply knows them by the names. They say this is Tom Sawyer, but it's not. It's the adventures of Tom Sawyer. And what that means is that they are stories. Stories about, adventures.
Advent.
And an advent is something, of course,
a religious word.
It's something that has to do with something that is coming in the future. And as a result, it's something that you don't really know about in advance. It has an element of surprise about it, the story does.
The mystery, surprise, and prophecy even. That is, the thing about an adventure is that when anybody like Tom Sawyer even sets out, he doesn't know what it is, but he knows that there's something out there.
Yeah, they go to the graveyard, and you say, well, if you go to the graveyard, something's going to happen.
You're going to meet
something's going to happen.
We use that word adventitious. That is, it's something out there waiting for you. And we use it in the religious sense. The Advent is the coming of Christ, and it had been prophesied. And the Advent is that season of expectation. It has about it. Dickens even has a novel. Well, that's not fair because he uses it in a different sense. Great expectation. But there is something about an adventure. You expect. You're on the lookout for something.
Well, the stories of the medieval romances of the Arthurian, all the Arthurian stories, very, very frequently begin with the knight setting out on his adventures. He doesn't really guide the horse. He isn't going towards some particular destination. He says, well, he'll just let the horse take this path or whatever path he wants to, and he will do things as they happen by adventure, he says. One of the phrases that comes up all the time in the Arthurian stories is by adventure and by grace, they say. By adventure and by grace, he came upon a maiden who was being abused by a churl, and you say, there it goes. You see, by adventure and by grace.
But you see, if you plan, it's the opposite of planning.
Yeah.
Well, one of the best ways I think to get out the word adventure would be that is whatever it isn't planned. If you go to a travel agent and you get your whole itinerary planned, you can't have an adventure. Or anyway, it's very difficult.
Well, it's meant to exclude the adventures, to eliminate anything that might happen by chance.
Despite them, things happen.
That's right.
Hijackers will, will out.
Occur, yes. They have a different plan.
I remember a fellow I knew years ago. He was a real existentialist. He took this idea too far and turned it into a false philosophy. But it was funny. People were talking about the danger of travel, and he clapped his hands and said, "Oh, I just love to be hijacked." He said, I mean, just think of how wonderful. He said, "That's why I travel."
Always hope. He'll never be hijacked. It'll never happen to him. You can't plan. You can't plan an adventure.
If you stay at all of the the best hotels that are that the travel agents have listed, and you go by the safe routes, well, they're trying their best to exclude adventure. And Harry Bailey says at the beginning, now I want you to tell a story, but damn it, there's one thing clear here. It's not going to be a planned story. It has to be, and the next word he uses is be found, which in a way explains what an adventure is. Well, he uses the word whilom. That's important too.
That's a mysterious word.
Oh, sure.
Whilom.
Well,
It's a little bit like our once upon a time phrase for stories. That at one time, whilom.
well, that's what it is. It's once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't say that it isn't a history. It isn't the same thing as an historical story. It's something that happened at whilom, once upon a time.
It jumps out of time. An adventure takes you out of time. And boy, it does. That is, whenever you have an adventure, that's one of the things that strikes you, is that there's something. I guess now we can go back to the beginning. We were talking at the beginning about this characteristic of Chaucer and of Dante, and of at least the greatest literature, that it is the concrete universal, that it is a paradoxical thing. It unites the universal type with the concrete reality of an individual person. Well, here again we have in that word whilom, it's something that you come across in time that knocks you out of time. Whilom. Forsan et haec olim. It's olim. I think isn't it actually literally olim? It probably is.
Might be.
I mean, whilom may very well be. Here I go again with my etymologies. I have an old friend, a colleague in the classics department, who, whenever I talk this way, I could always see him looking at me as if I was insane, because he was an expert on etymology, and he said, "There he goes again," you know. But my guess is that the word olim in Latin is the same as the word whilom, and if it isn't, the hell with them. I'm right and they're wrong. But that's exactly what it means. Didn't we ask everybody on the tape to memorize that line, forsan et haec olim,
yes.
meminus,
Yeah.
and that word is so that's what it means. Once upon a time. It can mean what? Either the past or the future.
Yes.
It did happen to you, or it will happen to you. Olim. I think in Virgil's phrase, it really means something like not once upon a time, but one day.
Yeah, one day. Someday.
Someday.
Tends to look toward the future in that particular phrase. It looks toward the future, some future occurrence.
There's a great.
The adventure does look toward some future occurrence.
There's a famous opera aria. I think it's Puccini, and I can't even remember the opera. Un bel dì. Beautiful song.
Beautiful day.
One beautiful day. And that's love. That's when it happens. That's it. That's whilom. And an adventure can only happen one beautiful day.
Well, and it's that's why it's contrary to the plan. That is, the plan it's all scheduled. You have a timetable. If you have a plan, you have a timetable. You've got things scheduled in some way, and so everything happens within that framework. And if something happens that's outside of it, you just disregard it. Pay no attention to it. You stick to the schedule. Now, actually, everybody does still work within that time frame. We work according to expectations and plans. But then what happens all the time is that something intrudes. An adventure intrudes into your plan. There's always a great contrast. People set out to do something. They say, well, this morning I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go to work. Well, you don't know.
Try it.
Yeah, you try it. It won't work. Something's going to come along, and you're going to. It will stop you. I mean, this is trivial. This is exceedingly trivial. But driving out to Mr. Senior's today, I've taken to planting wildflowers. I've got a little plot. I'm putting in wildflowers around the yard. And so I can identify some of the wildflowers. And I was driving out to Mr. Senior's today, and coming around a curve, and I looked off in the ditch, and by gosh, there was a purple cornflower in coneflower in bloom. And I almost drove off the road. You know, I almost had a real adventure because I almost drove off the road. And I thought right away, I'm going to stop and go out but I don't have anything to dig it up with. I'm going to dig that up. I don't have a tool, so I drove on. But
don't tell anybody. It's against the law. I think to dig up those things.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Next time, I'm going to have a shovel in the car. I'm going to dig those things. They're in the ditch.
The law is always against adventures.
Yes, exactly. And then some car will come along and hit me when I noticed there was no place to pull off the road. But that wasn't an adventure. It was a kind of incipient adventure.
Yeah, but you've illustrated a quality, though, of adventure. Yeah. Isn't it true that adventures do not happen to everybody?
Yeah, you have to notice. You have to be looking around. If you keep your eye on the road and watch everything, watch the speedometer, watch the line down the middle of the road, watch out for the traffic. Well, nothing will happen.
One of the sad things is, the fellow who says, in all seriousness, I've never had an adventure.
Nothing ever happened to me.
Again, T.S. Eliot, who is I guess we have to say he's a great poet. He's a modernist poet, but he really did see the utter desolation of modern life. And that's one of the recurrent themes. And, you remember in his poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the whole point of which is that it's not a love song. Yeah. But he says at the end, I've heard the mermaids sing, each to each, they will never sing to me. He says that over and over and over again. That is, I will never have an adventure. And you mentioned Henry James. Nobody in his novels ever has.
Oh, nothing. No, that's right. No.
There's very sad books.
Yeah.
Nothing ever happens. And there are people who doubt adventure. You can get into arguments about this, especially, of course, with literary people who deal with books. And they'll say, oh, well, stuff, even that Tom Sawyer stuff, there's no such thing as an adventure.
Those things don't really happen.
No, I mean, and the authors plan all that. They have an outline, and they figure it all out and everything, and there's no such thing. They don't believe in adventure. And you say, well, you've never had one. No, of course I've never had one. It's never happened to me. The thing about adventure is you have to be free. One of the amusing examples of this in our lives is always students. We've dealt all our lives with college students, and long about their senior year, they get very serious and they start to plan. Now, I don't know how many times I've sat down and listened. They come to us teachers for counseling, and the only counsel you give them is just kind of to nod and say, "Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, yes, you go ahead and do that. Oh, that's fine." That's all they can say. But they say, "Well, I've got it all figured out now. I'm going to. I think I'll go into the military for 2 years. I've signed up in the military, and after that, I'm going to come back, see, and they'll put me through medical school or law school or whatever it is, and then I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And then I figured it all out. By that time I'm 21 now, and by then I'll be 26, and then I'm going to get married, and of course I'll have a family, but I'll be prepared for it." And I'm saying, 6 months later, the whole thing, they fall in love. They find, some girl finds them, and it doesn't work. I've listened. I don't know how many times I've listened to students over the years who have their at least the next 10 years planned.
Oh well, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. It's the main bane of the academic life right now. Students who have their programs all laid out for college, down to the last. And if you suggest to them that they do something, they deviate in some way from that plan, they won't do it. They say, "No, I've already got this all figured out." So
that's
got it all worked out. And I know.
It's making life harder and harder to break in. I mean, it may be they'll get so that they won't break through.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, then they begin to run their whole lives that way. Then they begin to think, well, it isn't a matter of falling in love. What you do is you find the right girl or the right man. And you find them. You set out. You have a plan. Where you're going to find the right girl or the right man to marry.
They won't give the horses rein.
Yeah, and that's a disaster. Those are always disasters.
Or the right, like a religious vocation. I mean, you can't plan it. You can't. Again, we've known students who have spent their lives seeking religious vocations, and they almost never find them. If you start evaluating religious orders, you're never going to fall in love with one.
Well, the word that Harry Bailey uses is befall. Befall. That means really that it happens to you. It's not, a story is something that happens to you or to someone. It isn't something they do, really. Now, they may have to do something when the thing befalls them. They will have to do something, in fact. That is, they'll have to fight, or they'll have to get married, or they'll have to do something. But the fact is that it isn't something of their own making. It's something that comes to them. And in order for something to come to you, you have to be disposed for it to come to you. To have something befall you, you have to be disposed in some way for things to befall you. Oh, well, that's a religious principle. Say, well, we don't, we have to listen to God.
A man can't decide to become a priest.
Yeah.
He has to be open to the possibility that God will choose him.
A vocation is, after all, everyone knows the etymology of that.
There's no disputing that.
It's being called. It's to be called. Vocari, it's to be called. And if you're so busy, it's like people who are so busy on the telephone that nobody can call them. They're always calling people, and then they say, well, how come nobody ever calls me? And you say, well, you're on the phone all the time. Anybody call you, they get a busy signal.
God gets a busy
signal whenever he tries to talk to you. You're so busy trying to figure everything out that he can't get through. That's literally true.
To pick up that and make it a worse joke. What you're talking about now is these students have got it so well planned that God gets an answering service. Oh my gosh, where are we? Well, isn't that a I mean, we're proving the point about how good, how well written this book is. Look at that phrase. The definition of a story, of a tale. Of aventures that whilom hum before. That's what it is. And I guess all we have to do now is just push it one step further and say, your life is a tale. That's the point. I mean, you say, what's the point of this? Okay, so that's what a tale is. And, oh no, it's more than that. That is, your life is an adventure that one day befalls you.
You can see that. I think especially young people have a very hard time seeing this. But the trouble is that they haven't had enough of life yet. When this really strikes you forcibly is when you get a little older and you look back. Then when you look back, you say, my life has taken a lot of funny turns now that I look at it. If I hadn't done this, well, I would have never met this person. I would have never married this woman, or I never would have gone to this place, and my whole life would be different if I hadn't done that.
It's spooky.
It's spooky, yeah. You suddenly say,
it really is.
Gee, my life, if I had not, I always think, well, when I was 14, I was ill, and I almost died. I mean, I was so close to die. I should have died when I was 14 years old, but I didn't die. Now, that is strange, to me, because
so the rest
it would have changed my life. To put it mildly, it would have changed my life.
Borrowed time.
Yes, absolutely. And it would have changed a lot of other people's lives. Think of all the other lives who were changed by that thing, whether for better or for worse, but changed in a profound way. All my children, where would they be? My goodness, what a thought. They wouldn't exist. Not those children, those souls.
Reality
filled.
Again, Chesterton was fond of saying that, is that reality is the most surprising thing in the world when you think about it. That is, the things that are really surprising. You take a look at your grandchildren and you think of the accidents that happened in history that made them possible.
Led to their existence.
Whereas if you live in a world of ideology, there's nothing surprising about it at all. Everything makes sense.
Everything's inevitable.
Yeah. Everything
is inevitable. You say, oh well, yes, that's all. It's all. happened by a kind of inevitable design.
It's part of the plan.
Yeah. But when you look back on things, even very small things, you realize how little of your life was actually designed. Or even things that you designed, they have different consequences than what you expect. You say, well, I just took this course. I didn't think this. I just took this course by accident. It happened to fit my schedule, and my gosh, I got into this and I read this book and it changed my life. You say, well, that was an adventure. You did. You said, I certainly didn't have that intention in it, but you don't control the consequences of your acts at all.
There's just a world of meditation. What we're doing is chewing the cud over a single phrase here, but what a precise and rich phrase it is. That word whilome again too. One of the things about adventure is that it is once upon a time. That is one of the reasons why there's a lot of desperation in the world today, is that people expect every single day of their lives to be exciting. Whereas the storyteller knows that stories happen once upon a time. Not everything is a story.
Yeah. Well, the word "once" in that is a significant word.
Yeah.
Once.
You
singular.
People, we see some of our older students now, they're getting up into their 40s, and they go through a crisis because they think life ought to be continuously exciting. And what you say is, well, look, there are different times in life, and there's a time in life when you do exciting things, and there's a time in life when you don't do exciting things, when you do ordinary things. And a story is not on one key.
Well, these stories, The Knight's Tale is a story about two young men who fall in love with the same girl. Now, that only happens once in a lifetime. If it happens at all.
They're 20 years old.
And that's their whole life. That's the thing that really determines their whole lives. One of the young men dies. The other man marries the girl.
And that's the end.
And that's the end. That's their story of their lives. And you say, well, that's true of everybody. Everybody has a story of their lives.
Then what did they do? Well, they lived another 60 years. But what did they do? Well, they remembered.
They told that story. They told that story. And they remembered and they reflected on it. There's meditation for a lifetime.
I read in a newspaper just the other day that somebody's written a new book, Continuing Gone with the Wind.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yes, that is. All continuations.
There was a guy whose name is lost. Not only don't I remember it, but nobody remembers. There was an American playwright who wrote all the plays of Shakespeare, and they had to do with what Hamlet did after. Well, he died, but what in Fortinbras, the further adventures of Fortinbras. Yeah. Or I think in Hamlet's case, he wrote the earlier. He wrote the early life. What was Hamlet like at the age of 8? Now he was a victim of naturalism, of superrealism. Have you ever heard of that guy? It is a funny. He really existed, and he wrote collected works of some 30 plays, and they're long dramas, all having to do with either the early life of King Lear. It's just really funny and very serious. But what he was bitten by that bug of realism. That is, that life is not a story. See, that is, what happened to Hamlet when he was 8 years old is more important than what happened to him when he was 28.
Yeah. What led up to all this? What was behind all this?
What was behind? And we're constantly victims of that sort of thinking. That is, that the background is more important than the adventure. No, life really is an adventure, and we peak. We have moments when suddenly that's it, and then the rest of the time is less. Lordings, quod he, no hearkeneth for the best, but talketh nocti troyu in disdain. This is the point to speaking short and plain, that each of you to shorter with our way, in this viage shall tella talus tway. To Canterbury ward he made it so, and homeward he shall tell him of it to. Of aventures that whilome well, I missed the beat there, of aventures that whilom han befall. And which of you that beareth him best of all, that is to say, that telleth in this cause, talus of best sentence and the most solace, shall have a supper at our cost, here in this place, sitting be this post, one that we come again to Canterbury. And for to mock you the more merry, ye will be solven goodly with you read, richt it mean on a cost, and be your guide. And whoso will be judgment with say, shall pay all that we spend and be the way.
He's going to have it. He's going to have the say.
I'm the boss, and if anybody disagrees with me,
he is the only judge.
If anybody disagrees with me, he pays the whole cost. But I wanted to read just that one extra sentence because of the word merry.
Yeah, I thought that was what you were going to talk about. That was what I was
because, well, tales full of sentence and solace, and they are composed of aventure, but by golly, they're also merry. Even when, or especially when they're sad. Some of these tales are tragedies. They're sad, but they're all full of merriment.
Well, my eye lights on the last words of the prologue, and he began. This is the knight's tale. The knight begins. He said, "He began with richt a merry cheer, his talen on, and said in this manner." He begins to tell this long and somewhat melancholy tale in some ways, but he begins it with a merry cheer. That is his countenance. The cheer is your face. It's your countenance. It's your demeanor. But he's a merry man. The knight is very solemn. He's a very serious man, but he's merry too, and that's a great word. The word merry. You'll have to reflect on that as you read through these tales.